everybody, and welcome to another episode of Superheroes, Movies, and Superhero Movies. Today, we're going to talk about Back to the Future from 1985. Directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Thomas Wilson. I guess that's it.
Who's the principal?
I don't actually know who the principal is.
Okay.
The actor of the name. That movie and Top Gun are the only two movies
Ooh,
that I...
Billy Zane.
Oh, Billy. Of course, Billy Zane. Can't forget about Billy Zane. Written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. This movie, we have quite a bit of... Well, at least I have a bit of nostalgia for it. I remember watching this movie. This is probably one of the first... This and Ghostbusters. You know, we talked about Ghostbusters a couple episodes back. And I remember watching this movie, and I remember watching Ghostbusters the most when I was a young child. I had a VHS copy of this, and I had a VHS copy of Ghostbusters, and I'm surprised I did not wear them out because I watched them so often. Even before I really kind of could wrap my head around the time travel aspect of it, I would watch it.
Yeah, it kind of surprises me that this movie would grab your attention that much at such a young age.
I think from even when I was, before I could like articulate it, I think I knew I was a movie fan, even then. Because there were things we talked about when we were talking about Ghostbusters where jokes that went over my head and things I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, but these guys are fighting ghosts.
Well, that's very true. That you can, I guess you can see why how that would, but I don't know. Michael Keaton. Not Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton.
Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox has always been kind of one of my favorite actors. And I think when I was a kid, I just thought he was cool. I used to watch Family Ties a lot when I was a kid, and I dressed up as Alex P. Keaton. I dressed up as his character from Family Ties. I'd always want to like wear sweater vests and stuff out to preschool or whatever. And so when I started watching Back to the Future, I think I just thought Marty McFly was cool, which he is cool.
Yeah.
And I think that was really, for me at a young age, is what really kind of drew me to it. I just I wanted to be Marty McFly. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't, because I remember being confused at the end of Back to the Future. We're going to talk about the whole movie. If you haven't seen Back to the Future, first of all, shame on you. And secondly, see it so that we can, because we're going to spoil it. But I remember being confused near the end when he shows up 10 minutes. He sets the flux capacitor time date for 10 minutes earlier. I remember being confused as a little kid as to why there were two Marty McFlys. Because he's seeing himself, get chased by the Libyans. And I remember being like, what is going on as a kid? But I was like, whatever. And it wasn't until so the whole idea of going back to 1955 and everything, that... I guess I just didn't occur to me that was what was happening. Like the whole time travel aspect didn't make sense to me.
And that's what I'm talking about. Like, what interests you in this movie?
I really don't know.
Besides Marty McFly, maybe that was it.
That might have been it. Him skateboarding and being cool and playing guitar. I thought he was a cool dude. I mean, obviously, it clicked somewhere because I remember seeing Back to the Future Part 2 in 1989 in theaters, and I knew it was going on then. Mm-hmm. So it was somewhere between... I mean, this movie came out when I was 2 years old. And I don't think I saw it in the theater. If I did, I don't remember, obviously. So I was probably watching it on VHS in 1987, maybe. So somewhere between those 2 years, it finally clicked. But I do remember... I have a memory of being confused as to why there was a second Marty McFly.
That's funny. I don't remember the first time I saw Back to the Future. I haven't seen it near as much as you. I mean, I've probably seen it 5 or 6 times. I've only seen the second one maybe twice.
Wow.
And I don't even know if I've completely finished the third one.
That's a shame. A lot of people dislike the third one. And we talked about this with another movie. I can't remember what it was, but you remember how sometimes your parents... Oh, it was Batman Returns. You remember how, your parents' view on a movie can sometimes end up being your view on a movie?
Yeah.
My parents didn't like Back to the Future 2 that much. And I remember my dad really liked Back to the Future 3, but my dad's always... my dad was a Western fan for a long time. And so I always used to think Back to the Future 3 was better than Part 2.
Wow.
I don't know if that's really the case anymore, but I still like Back to the Future 3 a lot.
Yeah.
and I don't think that it's worthy of a lot of the criticism that it's gotten.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I haven't seen it in a while. But I saw that movie. I used to watch that movie all the time too.
I'm looking forward to seeing it again because I mean it's a really good idea. They go back to the 50s in the first one, then they go to the future
in the second one,
yeah, and then they go really back in the past,
back to 1885. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked it too. I like that it's always some year that ends with 5 too. It's 1985, 1955, 2015, and 1885. I like them all. Obviously, the first one is the best. And the first one, they didn't know that they were going to make a sequel when they made the first one. They ended it that way because they thought it was a fun ending. Mm-hmm. But I think, working with what they had, they made a couple of really great sequels, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. We'll obviously talk about those when they come. However, I do want to say October 21st, 2015 is the date they go to in Back to the Future 2. So I plan on October 21st, 2015, I plan on having like a Back to the Future marathon.
Of course.
And watching all 3 because I think that'd be, you gotta. It's like when you start in the beginning of Terminator 2, I think Judgment Day is supposed to be was August 10th or something like that, 1997. Because I remember being in I think I was in 8th grade or something, and I remember being like, today's Judgment Day.
At North Cap Christian.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I've seen this movie a ton. I could practically quote this movie. And it's always been one of my favorites. So it will always be one of my favorites. And did you know that Eric Stoltz was originally cast as Marty McFly?
I do remember that Michael J. Fox was not the original.
Yeah. They apparently, I guess they shot 2 weeks worth of the film with Eric Stoltz and realized that something was off. Something just wasn't quite working. And they fired him and cast Michael J. Fox and had to reshoot everything. And he added, I think, a bit more comedy to it. I think that was what I think was, I don't know for sure, but from what I understand, I think what was missing from Eric Stoltz's performance was he gave a good performance, but they were looking for something with a little bit more of a comedic edge to it, and he was maybe doing it just a little too seriously, perhaps, or something. I don't know. There's what really kind of drives me nuts is that there's Eric Stoltz footage out there somewhere, of him being Marty McFly, and I really wish we could see it just to see what could have been. And I think there might have been somebody cast differently as Jennifer too, because I want to say that Claudia Wells, I think that's her name, who was cast as Jennifer in the final version, was brought on after Michael J. Fox was brought on. And who knows what the reason for that was. Maybe the original Jennifer was too tall or something, who knows. Or maybe they didn't have the same chemistry or something. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting that Eric Stoltz was the original Marty McFly. And that's got to be terrible too. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where Eric Stoltz was in his career in the mid '80s. But you get this movie that Steven Spielberg is producing. You work 2 weeks on it. You're probably on cloud 9. I am making a movie. Steven Spielberg is producing it. Robert Zemeckis is directing it. I'm in the lead role. This is great. And then you get fired. And then Michael J. Fox comes in and knocks it out of the park. It becomes one of the biggest movies of all time.
All time. People are talking about 2015 being the year of Back to the Future.
So that's got to be disheartening. But, I mean, Eric Stoltz has obviously had a fine career now. He was in Pulp Fiction. But he's a director now. He directs a lot of TV.
Well, TV's becoming a big thing.
Yeah.
Well, it has for a few years. I think saying becoming a big thing is kind of past tense now. I mean,
yeah, it is a big thing.
Yeah.
And it also back in the day, it used to be considered like the end of your career if you were a movie star that went to TV.
Right.
And now it's like it could help your career.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Kevin Spacey doing it. Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, with True Detective and everything. Yep. Eric Stoltz, I got to work with him sort of I did background for an episode of Glee that he directed, and he seemed like a really cool, kind of laid-back guy. He seemed like he was...
Did you ask him how he felt about not getting the role?
I did. Because I was... It was one of those scenes where I was just in the audience at like a, was at a, what do you call it? Like a Glee Club production, I guess, or whatever. So no, I would have been like one of 1,000 people in the audience, and I'd just yell out, "Hey, Marty, how does it feel not to get back to the future?" No,
hey, Marty. Oh, wait. That's not your name.
Oh, wait. I mean, yeah, so that would have probably not been good.
Yeah.
But he seemed like a really nice guy, and, he seems like he's doing well. But yeah, I always thought that was interesting that Eric Stoltz was the original Marty McFly. First off, right off the bat, like one of the notes I wrote was Back to the Future is written extremely well.
Oh, yeah.
They set up everything in the beginning so perfectly. Like there's like, it seems like they're almost like throwaway lines where Marty talks about how his mom, I think Jennifer asks Marty, she's like, "Did your mom know about this weekend?" And he was like, "Get out of here."
Right.
He's like, my mom would have a cow. She knew we were going up to the lake by ourselves or whatever. He's like, "I think the woman was born a nun." And so
yeah.
it's like, it's all these little setups that you don't realize are setups for later that are coming.
The clock flyer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love how the movie opens up with the clocks. Mm-hmm. And it's just panning, and then you see all the different inventions, and you're just like, what? Whose house is this,
Yeah.
first of all? And what a character this guy is. So it really gets you interested in whose house it is, Doc Brown.
Yeah.
And then you've got the intro to Marty, which is great as well.
Plugging into the amplifier.
But they don't show him. You
Right.
see his tennis shoes and jeans walking in, plugging into the amplifier.
You even get a glimpse of the plutonium in that scene.
Oh yeah, I didn't notice that.
And it seems like a lot of people don't. When Marty first walks in, he kicks his skateboard, and the camera follows the skateboard over, and it hits the box of plutonium. You see the radioactive symbol on it and everything.
Oh, okay.
And he's like, "Doc," seeing if he's home or whatever.
Gotcha.
And then it cuts away from that.
Yeah.
And even the TV, there's the news reporter in the beginning is talking about a break-in last night where plutonium was stolen from a...
Oh, weird. I didn't
whatever.
pick up on that either.
Yeah.
Huh. But yeah, so you got him turning up the amplifier, and I mean, it blows him away. And then he's covered with debris. And then Marty McFly comes out with his aviator glasses on, and just
Out of the debris.
It was a great introduction shot for this character. I was really impressed with that.
And a lot of people think Steven Spielberg directed this movie because I think it's partially because the whole Steven Spielberg Presents.
Yeah, his name's all over it.
Right, but he just produced it. But I do feel like Zemeckis and Spielberg kind of have very similar styles, or at least did. Because there are a few shots in this movie that really make me feel like, they had Spielberg's touch or whatever. But they were Zemeckis. And that one is kind of one of them. The whole waiting to reveal Marty's face and then him pulling the glasses down. Yeah. Good stuff.
So I had a question that was pretty much answered as the movie went on. But because it's been a little while since I had watched this movie. And I was wondering why Doc Brown was wanting to invent a time machine to begin with.
Well, who wouldn't?
Exactly. I mean, he goes back in time. Marty does.
Right.
Runs into Doc Brown.
Yep.
And you see he's already doing these inventions. He's got that little device where he's trying to read Marty's mind.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the time machine is actually the first invention of his that's actually ever worked.
He says that.
Yeah.
He does. He says...
Maybe between 1955 and 1985, he's had a couple other inventions that worked.
Right.
Well, actually, you see in his house the whole dog food
Yeah.
arm and everything. So I think he's got some inventions that kind of work, little things, but nothing like groundbreaking, like a time machine.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what he was talking about. He with the mind reading machine, you can see this guy has big dreams, big goals. Mm-hmm. He's got a picture of Thomas Edison.
Yeah. Named his dog Einstein.
I named his dog Einstein. So I mean, he's wanting a big invention, a big breakthrough here.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's probably, when he does say that it's finally gets one working, that might have been in 1955 he said that, but
he did, yeah. In 1955, he's real excited because once he's shown the time machine and he sees the flux capacitor, I think that's when he says, I finally made something that works.
Yeah,
one of my invention works, or something like that, yeah. One of my notes that I wrote, and I feel like this is another thing that kind of went over my head when I was a kid, was, and something your wife kind of pointed out watching the movie tonight, was that the old age makeup really isn't all that great in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
The principal, Strickland, has some old age makeup on. I mean, all the people that have to be in the 80s and the 50s have makeup on.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, George McFly has makeup on. Lorraine has makeup on. And the makeup on George and Lorraine, I think, are the most noticeable to me.
I noticed it on Lorraine.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it so much on
George. But on Strickland and Doc Brown, those two I feel like are the weakest. And I remember there's a scene in part 2 where once they arrive in the future, it was very clear to the filmmakers that they didn't want to have Christopher Lloyd in old age makeup for the whole movie. So he talks about how he got a bunch of plastic surgery done, and he starts peeling off the makeup. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, what is he doing? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that he had to be wearing old age makeup in the 80s because he was supposed to be however old in the 50s. But it's like, in my opinion, it's really barely noticeable, especially on Strickland. Like, you can only see it like on his neck.
Yeah.
And the, like, maybe a little bit amount of hair that they added, like, I mean, he's bald on top, but I think they added a little bit on the side or something in the 50s. But other than that, he looks the exact same age, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, to me, I feel like that's just one of the not negative. I mean, it's not anything I hold against the movie by any means, but it was one of the weaker elements, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Like the old age makeup just didn't really make them look that old.
Yeah.
It really, especially except for Lorraine, like you said. All the men, it seems like they don't really age a whole lot. I do feel, for me, I could tell that George McFly was older, but
I think they added some weight to Lorraine too. Because
Yeah.
Marty mentions how thin she is when he first sees her
at the end or in the beginning,
yeah. When he gets hit by the car, and then when he comes back and everything's changed because George is successful now because of his actions and everything. And I think, and you see how, good Lorraine looks too. I think they cut back on, they made her thinner in the present time as well.
She doesn't seem to be drinking anymore either.
Right.
Like,
so I think the first time you see her, they really put on a lot to try to make her just look kind of old,
and plain,
just kind of tired and worn.
And that part of me wonders: do you think Lorraine in the future is like really unhappy?
Well,
she doesn't seem like she's. I mean, she still talks about meeting George and falling in love at the dance,
which was weird
because I feel like the way she drinks, and I know she's upset about her brother not getting released from prison, which they never addressed that in the new future. So I wonder if he's still in prison, but. I do wonder if maybe Lorraine isn't happy in her marriage, and she maybe wonders if she like married the wrong man or something like that, and that's like why she drinks or something.
Right. That's what I was gathering. But then there's that part where she's talking about, like you said, where she first met him. But then I think I might have noticed like a kind of look that she gave where she was almost like questioning it. Like, I'm saying this almost out of habit.
Yeah.
Like, do I really feel that way
anymore?
Yeah.
Right. I always assumed that she still looked back, maybe at the time with like fond memories and stuff. But yeah, but then obviously it cuts to George going,
right,
and you're like, he's such a dweeb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the fact that like Biff is still pushing him around to this day, I'm sure that's something else that probably bothers her. Yeah. So Marty's life is like, it's not a bad life. Like, and he's not getting bullied around and stuff like that. Marty has seemed to have a fairly decent childhood. His brother, it's just like nobody really in his family is all that successful. And I think that's part of the reason for that is because George doesn't believe in himself and never really probably told his kids that they could believe in themselves either, because that's part of Marty's whole problem.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning of the movie, he talks about how he doesn't want to send a tape to like record companies or anything because they say, what if they say I'm no good? What if they were, I don't know if I could handle that type of rejection, which is exactly what George says in the 50s. But
at the same time, he's doing the talent show.
He is auditioning for that, right? And then they tell him they're too darn loud, which is interesting because he is auditioning, but he's rejected.
Right. And you pointed out that's actually Huey Lewis.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yep, Huey Lewis is the guy that says, "I'm afraid you're just too darn loud." But I also feel like if you look at the other kids, if you look at Marty's brother and sister, his brother looks like he's about 30 years old, and he's working at like Burger King or something like that, and he's got to take the bus to get there. And then the daughter is complaining about how she's never going to meet anyone. Mm-hmm. And so you're assuming she's like never had a boyfriend, and partly you have to wonder if it's because like she doesn't believe in herself either. She's got no confidence. George has no confidence. The older brother has no confidence. By the way, the older brother is Mark McClure, who played Jimmy Olsen in Superman the movie, and probably Superman 2 and 3 and 4. So that wasn't something that was honestly something I hadn't thought about until tonight, about how like nobody in the family has any confidence in themselves. Lorraine might, but at that point it's too late for her anyway.
Yeah.
Or at least she probably thinks it's too late for her or whatever. And so going back in time and changing things obviously really helps. I always knew it helps because you see George and Lorraine, they're happy and they seem successful and they have a BMW and the older brother, whose name I can't remember, works at an office now. But even the sister is talking about, he's like, I can't keep up with all your boyfriends. And so she's like doing really well, even though I guess it's kind of a weird way to determine if somebody's doing well is she has a lot of boyfriends. Right. But the point is it's like the opposite of what it was before. They all have a lot of confidence in themselves now, and it's funny that Marty had to teach his dad that, and then in turn his dad taught that to the kids.
Going back to the beginning of the movie, when they're testing the DeLorean with the dog,
with
Einstein, that was quite a risk they took.
For a couple different reasons, yeah.
I'm talking about when they stand there.
Yes. Well, yes. I mean, he obviously is putting his dog's life in danger, but he's obviously putting their lives in danger.
He's like, no, stand here. It's okay.
Yeah.
If my calculations are correct.
Yeah. What if your calculations aren't correct, Doc? Yeah, and every time Marty tries to get out of the way, Doc, like, pulls him closer or, like, makes him move.
And it's literally, like, a foot away from them when the car
finally goes
away.
I would have been jumping out of the way much earlier.
I noticed it looked like Marty's foot should have caught fire.
Yeah.
It's like standing in the line.
Yeah, that you can tell that fire was added later, because I think if you look at Doc's feet too, like Marty kind of keeps his feet separated and looks behind him, but Doc completely moves his feet, and I think one's like right in the middle of the flame or something like that. So yeah, that always bothered me. I'm like, you'd be burning right now. But I wonder who came up with that idea that once it went to the future, or once it went to a different time, it left behind tire tracks of fire.
Great idea.
It's a great visual.
Yeah, it's iconic.
Yeah, and I remember. I don't know. I wonder. Well, the poster had it as well. The poster kind of had those tire tracks of flame. But I remember I had an old skateboard. By the way, I think this movie is what made me want to learn how to skateboard, which I never did.
I didn't either.
I know, and I really wish I had. There's a part of me that still wants to, but I feel like there's something that's just sad about a 31-year-old trying to learn how to skateboard.
I would support that theory.
I need like...
I'm just kidding. No, go ahead, do it.
You just want to see me out there. You want to see me out there doing it. Trying to skateboard, and there's a bunch of 12-year-olds like passing me up. No, but I had a skateboard with the DeLorean on it, and it had like the two tire tracks of flames on it. And I remember loving it. I think my brother gave it away or something. I would still have that skateboard to this day. If it weren't for my brother. Just kidding. No, but great. Like, that's just iconic imagery now, you know? And I love how, like I said, the writing for this movie is great. I wish I could have been in the room when they kind of were brainstorming about how like the outline of the movie was going to go. They're like, okay, so Doc Brown is showing Marty the time machine. Now something has to happen in order for Marty to go back in time instead of Doc. And they come up with this whole idea about, he stole plutonium for Libyan terrorists, and he gave them a bomb full of pinball machine parts. So then the terrorists show up, and they're angry. But it also adds that whole element, because then they shoot Doc, and he's...
Yeah, exactly.
He's got to tell Doc that information.
It all fits so well.
It's amazing how well it fits together. It's like a puzzle that was, designed to... I mean, it really just... There's very few plot holes in this movie. I think we kind of pointed out like one or two in the beginning or near the end of the movie. One of the plot holes I think is that once he changed the future, I guess you would call it.
Oh yeah,
I don't think his family would have been living there, but you never know. I mean, it's the same exact house, just with better like furniture inside,
right?
And I feel like if they were really that successful, they probably would have lived somewhere else. Which would have been a really interesting way to end the movie. He's like in somebody else's house, which they do in part 2. And then he's got to like find where his family lives or something. This is the age before cell phones and all that.
Right. When Biff goes back.
Yeah, in part 2, Biff goes... Well, there's that whole... In part 2, there's the whole storyline with the sports almanac. Right. So Biff now is like the richest man in Hill Valley. And so there's a different family that lives in that in that house. But... And that's kind of what I think would actually happen if but it's still, I mean, it's you kind of have to go with that, because otherwise it gets a really complicated ending where he's in somebody else's house and he has to find his family all over again. Like, it's a much better ending the way it is. Like, it's a plot hole that I will absolutely accept. And then I don't really know if it'd be a plot hole or not, but we were talking about like whose car did he take to the dance? Like, why does he have that car? That really nice car.
Yeah, it's a nice car. I mean, it's got this like gigantic angel
hood ornament.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
And I'm just assuming that that's Doc's car. It's got to be. Who else could it? I don't know who else. I have no idea, unless it's George's car. Like George lent him the car or something. George does know exactly which car it is.
He does, but would George really be driving that car?
Look, I'm assuming it would be George's parents' car.
Yeah.
But I have no idea. And why would George's parents let Marty McFly drive that car? Or Marty Calvin Klein.
So it comes back. You were talking about the mom.
Lorraine.
Being a nun.
Yeah.
She clearly...
is not a nun.
She's looking at his underwear.
Yeah, well, Marty immediately gets himself into trouble because he sees his dad in the diner. And, real quick, I want to talk about one of my favorite parts, which is where it's funny to me. I would assume it would get lost on today's audience because they don't like Tab is not really that popular of a drink anymore,
right? And
Pepsi Free doesn't even exist anymore.
It took me a second to get that,
really.
And then, and then when he said Pepsi Free, I was like, oh, the Tab, the drink. Okay,
right. So he's like, give me a tab. And he's like, I can't give you a tab unless you order something. He's like, oh, give me a Pepsi Free. And he's like, if you want a Pepsi, kid, you're going to pay for it. Which I think is funny, even, today, even though those, like I said, those drinks. Tab, I think, still exists, but nobody really drinks it. And Pepsi Free is long gone. But so anyway, he sees his dad in the diner, and he decides to follow him. And that's when he finds out that his dad is a peeping Tom, staring in, girls' windows with binoculars. But then he instinctively tries to save his dad from getting hit by a car without really realizing that he was altering his future.
And more great writing.
Exactly, yeah. And it also just, makes Marty McFly look like a good guy. He's like trying to save this guy from getting hit by a car and everything.
Well, sort of. I mean, it's kind of in his interest, that is his dad.
Oh, that's true, yeah. And obviously he didn't realize that the whole... Because he's heard that story 100 times, I'm sure, from his mom, Grandpa hit your father with the car because he was bird watching or something. And so how would he know that that was that day? You know, November. It's funny that like Doc Brown comes up with the flux capacitor on the exact same day that George McFly gets hit by Lorraine's dad's car.
Right. That's kind of convenient.
Yeah, it is convenient. But that's okay. Again,
yeah,
completely okay. Because we don't really quite realize that that's the case until he wakes up and like Lorraine has got the hots for him now instead of George. So Marty, I think, realized Marty doesn't quite realize that he's in hot water yet. He doesn't realize that he's changed the course of history quite yet. He just knows that his mom is acting very strange, and that he needs to find Doc Brown.
Who's the kid that was in the Wonder Years?
I don't know the actor's name. I'd have to look it up. But the Lorraine's little brother is the older brother on the Wonder Years.
Yeah, I was impressed with his acting actually. Like when Marty brings up that he has 2 TVs. Yeah.
Whoa!
Yeah,
you must be rich.
No one has 2 TVs, and then no, that wasn't what it was. It was talking about the episode.
Yeah,
and he's like, "How would you know that? It's new,
brand new."
And he's like, "Well, I saw a rerun." He's like, "What's a rerun?" But it was his acting. He just, kid actors frequently are questionable.
Sure,
I thought he played that pretty well.
No, yeah, I agree. Wearing the Davy Crockett hat and stuff. There's just so many great little lines and moments in Back to the Future that like you don't necessarily pick up on the first viewing, like like watching it with your kids tonight was interesting because I think they don't they know certain facts but they can't like place on the timeline,
right?
So when he was asking about, oh, you mean John F. Kennedy Drive? And the guy was like, who's John F. Kennedy? It was funny to hear your daughter say he was the second president.
I was like, no, that was John Adams. Oh, maybe he was the third.
And so in her mind, she's like, this guy's dumb for not knowing who John F. Kennedy is.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really, really funny. But it's little lines like that. And then there's one of the lines I had forgotten about until tonight was when Doc Brown he finally goes to Doc Brown's house, convinces him that he's from the future, and they're showing he's showing the camcorder footage to young Doc Brown, and he goes, "What is that? What am I wearing?" And he goes, "That's a radiation suit." And he goes, "Of course, from all the fallout from the atomic wars."
Love that. That's the first time I
picked
didn't
up on that one. Yeah. It's because it's so just like it's such a throwaway line,
And those make movies a lot of times.
Sometimes they do, yeah.
I don't think Marty would have been able to connect that camera to the television
plot hole.
Yeah,
no, I agree. I think he would have, at best, shown it to him through the little viewfinder on the camcorder, and he wouldn't have been able to hear it.
Yeah,
but again, you need to have a way for Marty or for young Doc Brown to hear that they need 1.21 gigawatts of electricity.
His reaction to that is great.
1.21 gigawatts!
Just starts running circles around the building.
Oh man!
But that's where it comes full circle because you've got the clock, and how are you going to get 1.21 gigawatts?
You need a bolt of electricity,
yeah,
or a bolt of lightning to generate such power.
How can you predict where lightning is going to strike?
Dun dun dun.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that whoever, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who came up with the idea for this movie and pieced it together, just it fits, perfectly together. It's up there with, and I know this is going to sound silly, but Home Alone is one of Home Alone and Back to the Future, I think, and Ferris Bueller are some of the best written comedies, I think, in
two of those.
Ever.
John Hughes.
I know.
John Hughes, man, we lost a good man.
I used to say that he was, before he died, I used to say he was the funniest man alive because he wrote so many funny movies. And when
I didn't know he wrote Vacation.
Yeah, Vacation, European Vacation, and Christmas Vacation.
I don't think he did Christmas Vacation.
He did.
Did he really?
He didn't do European, or not. He didn't do Vegas Vacation, but he did Christmas Vacation.
Unfortunately, European Vacation was pretty not good.
Yeah, and that's the only one where he has a co-writer.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if he wrote European Vacation and then it got changed by this other writer, or what.
That's weird. Why would that happen? I can't think of why that would happen.
I don't know. Why would you ever change John Hughes?
It's John Hughes.
I know.
Got Breakfast Club, 16 Candles.
Ferris Bueller. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I mean, so many of my favorite comedies were written by John Hughes. When I found out just how many movies he had written, I was like...
It's astounding.
I couldn't believe it.
A lot of people don't even know who he is.
I know. Sadly, he kind of, stopped writing... He did Disney movies for a little while there. He was doing... obviously, he was doing, like... it wasn't original content anymore. He was getting paid to write scripts for studios and stuff. And I read a little bit about him like around the time that he died.
He kind of went into seclusion.
He did, and he really blamed it, I think, on he didn't want to work in a place because he really felt like Hollywood killed John Candy. And John Candy, if you look at his the resume, John Hughes' filmography, John Candy had a big part of his
he's an Uncle Buck.
Uncle Buck, The Great Outdoors, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. He's in Home Alone. Mm-hmm. So
he was in Vacation too, wasn't he?
He was in Vacation. Yep. So when John Candy passed away, I think John Hughes, I think really felt like it was Hollywood that did it to him, and didn't really want to have anything to do with Hollywood anymore. And so he started like writing scripts to kind of pay the bills and stuff like that, but he didn't really. I think because John Candy died in like the early '90s, and I think after that, there's like very few movies that he wrote that were like original scripts, and nothing as good as his earlier movies. You know what I mean? Like he did like Baby's Day Out and stuff like that, which I don't know if that was an original or if that was something that he got like hired to do. But,
never saw it.
Me neither. We're getting a little off topic there, but yeah, John Hughes was still one of my favorites. His writing is amazing.
Legendary.
Mm-hmm. So back to the Future. Marty's in 55 now. He's trying to get home, but not only does he have to get home, but now, because he altered history, he's got to set up his dad with his mom.
What a conundrum.
What a conundrum. Which at first seems like it should be easy. His mom fell in love with his dad before, right? So all you got to do is just like have George McFly talk to Lorraine. Oh no, not that simple.
Well, I mean, you kind of meet George,
right,
and then you really see what's going on here.
But the whole reason,
and Marty's so impressive to her. I mean, she's just blinded by anybody else but Marty.
Right,
Calvin
Klein. He's so dreamy. Right, so he finds out that this is going to be a little bit harder than he had anticipated. But I mean, the whole reason in the original timeline that Lorraine fell for George was because of the whole Florence Nightingale effect that Doc Brown talks about, how nurses will sometimes fall in love with their patients. And so because George didn't get hit by her dad's car, she didn't have the chance to kind of take care of him and fall in love with him. So now he's got to really try to figure out a way to get George to impress and kiss and date Lorraine. And George doesn't really want to go with it at first. And this is where we find out that Marty and the audience finds out that George McFly is actually a creative writer.
Mm-hmm.
He writes science fiction stories.
But he won't let anyone see them.
Doesn't want anybody to read them because what if somebody said they were bad?
Yep.
And he doesn't think he could live with that kind of rejection. Well, this is one of my favorite moments in the movie. Marty decides that he's going to have to force George to ask Lorraine out. So he puts on that radiation suit, and he puts Van Halen in a tape player, puts the headphones on.
I love the
George
way
McFly.
when he hits the button, his arms held out. It looks like an alien device on him, and he's like, "Whoa, power!"
And you have to think about it, Walkmans didn't exist back in the 50s.
Right. So it fits totally.
Right. And Van Halen, the music, that type of music didn't exist.
Sounds like alien, yeah.
But here's the note that I wrote down that I think is funny, that I'd never thought about until today. George McFly lives his entire life thinking that there are actual aliens who visit Earth because he's met Darth Vader from Vulcan. And so you have to assume, like, you know, he doesn't tell anybody about that. He tells Marty at first. He's like, I have to ask Lorraine out because Darth Vader from Vulcan said that if I didn't, he'd melt my brain. But I mean, that happened in his, like, real life. So unless eventually he thinks that it was a dream. But here's where I think this is what's really funny. 1960 whatever rolls around and Star Trek comes on, right? And he hears about Spock from Vulcan. He's like, what? And the creator of Star Trek was George Roddenberry, right?
Right.
Well, then a few years later,
Gene Roddenberry.
Oh, it was Gene Roddenberry. It wasn't George. Well, then this throws my theory out the window. But I was gonna say a few years later, Star Wars comes out, and Darth Vader is on screen, and I can imagine George McFly watching it and being like, and it says, like, written by George Lucas. And I was thinking it was George Roddenberry, but it is Gene Roddenberry. And I was like, every single one of these guys, George McFly, George Lucas, and Gene Roddenberry, were visited by Darth Vader from Vulcan, and that was, like, giving them their
That would
ideas.
have been awesome.
Yeah.
No, it's Gene Roddenberry. Sorry.
No, you're right. I should have
What kind of
known
Star
that.
Trek fan are you?
I had a slip.
I mean, that good old Adam Lucas that wrote Star Wars.
Now you're just getting mean. I had the right first letter, at least.
Yeah.
It wasn't that far off.
2 letters.
Yeah. So, anyway, I thought that was funny when I came up with it, but you're right, it is Gene Roddenberry. George Roddenberry didn't sound quite right.
Nice theory, though.
Thank you.
That would have been pretty cool.
But I do like the idea that George McFly still to this day, like, believes in aliens and stuff like that.
You know, he
because
saw
was
Star
visited
Wars.
One. Oh yeah.
So that would have had to have freaked him out,
right? Especially when he hears about Darth Vader, he'd have been like, I imagine he would have immediately thought, like, Darth Vader visited George Lucas too. You know.
That reminds me, though, of the you brought up the Family Guy episode, which is hilarious.
Yeah. It was just recently. I think it might have been like the latest episode or the latest season to be on Netflix. But there was one of those, famous cutaways that Family Guy does all the time, and it was Lorraine and George. And George McFly asked Lorraine, "Hey, when's the last time you saw that Marty guy from high school?" And Lorraine's like, "I don't know. I haven't seen him since the high school dance." And he goes, "Oh, really? Then why did you insist that we name our third kid Marty? And he looks exactly like him." Which would have been really funny. It's funny that, like, that's another thing that I always wondered about. They, at the end of the dance, she's like, "Marty, that's like such a nice name. Yeah. Why wouldn't you name your first kid Marty? If, like, that's what you were thinking."
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Like, I really feel like once he got back to 1985, his brother would have been named Marty, and he would have had a different name.
I'm surprised, since they weren't thinking of a sequel, that they didn't do that.
Yeah.
That would have been a good touch for a non-sequel movie.
Yeah, for his brother to be named Marty and his name to be like Will or something.
Yeah, just a nice little twist at the end. It would have been good.
Every time they're like, "Marty," they're both like, "Huh?" Yeah, so I think that's kind of funny that they waited till their third kid to name him Marty. Again, though, it's, acceptable. One of my notes here, I don't have a whole lot more, but one of them I wrote is, because it was during the dance sequence when Crispin Glover is at the dance by himself, waiting for the clock to hit like 9 o'clock.
Right, and he's dancing by himself. Yeah.
I wrote, Crispin Glover is almost a bit of an over-actor, but it works really well for the character of George McFly. And the scene that I'm thinking in particular is, like, he's dancing by himself, and then he looks up and he sees that it's 9 o'clock. And I feel like he does this, like, really exaggerated, like like look at, like, the time. But it's, George McFly is kind of such a nerdy
he does
character.
it throughout the movie, and it really gives his character personality and life and a uniqueness.
Yeah. One of the other things that I wrote was at the dance, Marty comes up with this whole plan that he's going to take advantage of Lorraine. and George is going to come save the day. Well, Marty obviously has some trouble going through with that plan once he gets to the dance, because he just can't get, it's his mom. Like, everybody would have that problem. And then that's the scene where we really see that Lorraine is not a nun. She's talking about how she has been in cars with boys before, and if you go back
on
to the
Grandpa's medicine,
right? Yeah, smoking cigarettes, and so it makes I
love where Marty spits out the.
You smoke too?
You're starting to sound like my mom.
Yeah. Well, I wrote down that if Biff hadn't come along and kicked Marty out of the car, and Billy Zane hadn't thrown him in the trunk, Marty's plan wouldn't have worked. Because
that's right.
George would have shown up, Marty wouldn't have been doing anything, and George would have just looked like a bully.
Yeah.
And then Lorraine would have probably gotten mad at George. Ooh. Yeah. So it's actually really good that Biff came along and kicked Marty out.
That scene is so great. It just I can't explain it. It's very heartwarming to see when
George McFly's fist ball up.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's very satisfying.
Crispin Glover's performance there, his facial expressions, adding the Biff laughing.
Yeah.
When he pushes down Lorraine. Just that whole scene, it just was awesome.
Yep. You can just hear. Thankfully, they didn't do some sort of voiceover because that would have been cheesy. But you can just hear, Crispin Glover throughout the whole movie. George McFly doesn't believe in himself, and then we've had Marty kind of sit there and tell him, anything you put your mind to, you can accomplish, and he finally kind of believes it there at the end. And
you just see the underdog,
step up, absolutely. And then we get to see it again, which is great.
Yeah,
and that's another thing that I wanted to point out was like I love the whole. It's if you want to think about like time travel as like what would obviously I don't know if this was what would really happen because time travel doesn't exist, but you would think that what would actually happen once history was changed is that Marty would cease to exist, but maybe Marty would cease to exist like just immediately. But instead they do this great photo thing where you see like the brother kind of slowly disappearing. And then,
which doesn't really make sense because why would the picture? Well, no, that's not true.
The picture wouldn't even exist.
But like we're talking about, it's a slow fade,
right?
So I guess the picture is there.
I think what it's saying is like, as the picture is fading, it's like history getting farther and farther off course. I think like with the picture, like when he first shows the picture to Doc, and Doc thinks it's a forgery because the brother's hair is missing. I think it's because like there's still a chance that the original timeline could kind of come back, but as it fades, it's like it's getting farther and farther away, and it comes down to that kiss on the dance floor, and
that was pretty much as heartwarming and just awesome as the fist,
right? And it just shows you that it's not just Biff that looks at George McFly as a kind of dweeb or geek or whatever. Like, even this redheaded kid that comes in is like,
right.
I'm cutting in, McFly,
And I asked that, when he punches Biff.
Yeah.
And, like, there's that group of kids, it's like, who is that? That's George McFly. I was like, how do they know if he's that much of a loser? But he is that much of a loser that everyone knows his name.
Everybody knows who George McFly is.
Yeah.
And because that girl was like, that's George McFly? Mm-hmm. And then after he comes up to that redhead kid and goes, excuse me, and just shoves him to the ground. People start asking if he wants to like run for class president and stuff, which I think is funny.
Yeah.
But it's really, he's got the confidence now at this point. He almost lost it because when that kid cut in, he almost just like walks away, and you see Marty start to literally fade in front of our eyes.
That kid that cuts in, man, he's getting a big kick out of it too. I mean, he's laughing like an evil villain.
So it was nice to see him get shoved to the ground like that. And then, of course, they kiss, and then immediately the brother and the sister and Marty all pop back up in the picture, and he's able to play guitar.
It's always funny how quickly Marty stands up.
Yeah. I feel like the footage is sped up a little bit there.
It is.
Yeah. But it's great. It's a great moment. It's really funny the way they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The song, too, you pointed this out to me. The song that Marty plays after that. The rock and roll song.
Yeah.
Johnny Be Good.
Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry.
Right. He calls...
Marvin, yeah. The band playing at the high school dance is Marvin Berry and the Starlighters, I think. And so he, at first Marty's like, no, I gotta go. But they're like, no, let's play something that really kicks. So he's like, all right. And so he starts playing Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. And Marvin Berry goes over to the phone, and he's like, Chuck, it's your cousin Marvin. Marvin Berry? You know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this. And so I like the whole idea that Chuck Berry came up with Johnny Be Good because of Marty McFly or something, you know?
It's the exact same song, too.
Oh,
so
yeah,
he just ripped off
He just really stole it.
Basically, Marty wrote it because it wouldn't have gotten written if
That's very true.
Chuck hadn't heard it.
Although Marvin only calls him in the middle of the song, so it just so happens that Chuck Berry was able to come up with the beginning exactly like it.
Yeah.
He's like, well, this must have been what he did. Although maybe Marvin showed him. You know, Marvin knows how to play guitar. He just couldn't because he sliced his hand.
Right.
So maybe Marvin saw it and learned how to do it immediately or something.
That's what it was.
So really, Marvin Berry, kind of wrote the song. Billy Zane was the. They don't really show you kind of what happens to Biff's henchmen. I guess they get chased off by Marvin Berry and the Starlighters, and then that's the last you see of them, really, right?
I think so. Yeah. I didn't even know that was Billy Zane until you pointed it out to me.
Yeah, Billy Zane. I think he's in the second one, but I think he's not part of Biff's. Every time you see Biff and his crew, even though it's a different year, I think he has different actors playing the different crew members, which I think would be funny if it was the same actors every time.
They hang around with him all those years.
Yeah, like Billy Zane's kid hangs out with the Biff's kid or whatever. Yeah, so anyway, I was going to say it would be nice to kind of see them kind of get their comeuppance, but I guess you kind of do. They get run off by the band. So yeah, and then everything is right in the world with Marty. Well, then he goes. That's when he has to go meet Doc at the clock tower because of the whole lightning strike, and he tries really hard to tell Doc that he's going to get shot on the night of.
That's some stuff I wanted to talk about. That how hard that is to. Doc does not want to know.
Yeah,
and
he's
Marty
being very stubborn.
Marty, for a while, he's playing along. He's like, he doesn't want to know, but he just, when it comes down to the last few seconds that Marty knows he's going to be able to tell him, he's determined to.
Yeah.
But then he gets in the car and he's like, oh, what am I doing? I can just set the time back
10 minutes.
10
I
minutes.
can save him.
Yeah.
Which wasn't enough. But that's partially because the car ran out of gas or something.
Plutonium.
Well, he doesn't need plutonium to drive. He just needs plutonium to travel through time.
Ah. Yes.
Yeah.
It is a DeLorean.
It is a DeLorean. Maybe DeLorean's running plutonium. No, but I love that too. There's so many things that have to happen perfectly for this plan to happen. He has to drive that car and hit the wire at exactly the right moment. Otherwise, he's not going to get sent back through time. And he has to basically hit 88 miles per hour right when he hits the wire.
Yeah.
And the lightning has to hit the wire at the same time.
And I was wondering, how did they know exactly when the lightning struck? But there's a more brilliant writing, It shut down the clock.
And the exactly 10:04 or whatever it was.
The clock's, whenever the clock stopped, that's when the lightning hit.
Yeah.
But there's that 60 seconds.
There's that 60-second window. But I believe the woman at the very beginning of the movie, when she's saying, save the clock tower, which, by the way, it's been dead for 30 years. I guess they haven't been able to raise the money to fix it in 30 years. She says, I'm pretty sure, at exactly 10:04 or whatever time it is that gets hit, lightning struck the clock tower. Right. So it's like, she kind of sets it up too. She's like, she lets us know that at exactly that moment,
right,
Even though, like you said, there's no witnesses.
How does she know?
How does she know? She was probably 10 years old?
Maybe they were able to look at the
Not even
clockwork.
that.
The cogs or something, and be able to
Be like, oh, maybe.
But why would they go, when exactly did this lightning hit this clock?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I think it's a plot hole. But I'm fine with it.
Me too. And the fact that they did have it lightning strike at exactly that time. You know what I mean? So they didn't have to worry about it. But everything has to go so perfectly for that plan that it's practically an impossible plan. And then especially when Marty gets to the start line and he's like, all right, all I have to do is go back 10 minutes, and he sets the timer, and then the car dies. It just adds that much more
there's so much suspense in that scene.
Yeah.
The cables come apart from the tree falling. Doc can't get it to go back because of that tree.
Right. He unplugs it from the other end.
Yep. And he slides down Batman style.
Yep.
To go fix the other side on the bottom.
So it's another added element of, intense kind of, is he going to make it type stuff, and of course he finally does. He finally turns it on, but it makes me wonder if it hadn't died, would he have? Because the timer goes off and the car still hasn't started just yet, so he has to wait an extra. I would say it's not much. It's an extra 3 or 4 seconds probably. Mm-hmm. Because the timer goes off and he's like, "Come on!" and he slams his head against the steering wheel and for whatever reason that starts the car.
Starts it up,
and then he slams on the gas. I'm assuming he would have slammed on the gas as soon as the timer went off anyway.
Yeah,
to try to get up to 88 miles an hour. So it's like fate or destiny or whatever.
Doc Brown has bad calculations.
Well, his calculation was off just by a hair, and so if the car hadn't died and then started up when it did, I think he would have been off by just a split second, and he would have hit the wire too early. I think he would have hit the wire too early, and the lightning would have just gone.
And he would have been stuck.
And he would have been stuck in 1955. Yep. Which would have been crazy, because he would have lived for. He was probably, how old do you think he was in that? Probably 17 or 18.
Yeah,
he was a senior.
Yeah,
he's 17, 18 years old, so he'd lived.
He's old enough to drive.
Yeah, he's got a driver's license and everything. He would have lived for 30 years and seen himself be born, and then he would have it would have been, that's a alternate version of Back to the Future Part 2. I think that would be interesting to come up with. But yeah, but fortunately the plan works for him, obviously. But like I said, if the car had not stalled for a moment there, he wouldn't have been able to get back in time. But he shows up in 1985, but of course the car dies again. That's why he's got to run to, if you'll notice, it's not Twin Pine Malls anymore, it's Lone Pine Mall. Because he ran over the pine in the beginning of the movie when he was leaving Peabody's farm.
Oh, nice.
A lot of little jokes like that I think are great.
Yeah.
Shows up at Lone Pine Mall, but he's too late. He sees Doc he shows up right when Doc gets shot. And then I always love that he's about to yell no, and you hear the no from the other Marty down on the...
Right, that confused me this time. I was like, he's not... I was like, that didn't sound quite right.
It's because he was about to do it. He's like... And then you hear the other Marty go, no!
Thankfully, Doc Brown decided to tape together the letter that Marty gave him, and he decided to rip up right before Marty goes back
in time,
to the future.
Oh yeah, Back to the Future, right?
Back to the present, really. He tapes it and prepares. Which I never understood why when Marty rolls him over,
why he was acting dead.
He's laying there like he's dead. His eyes are open. I mean, he knows it's Marty.
Maybe that's why he was like, "This is gonna get him." He's like,
Marty thinks I'm dead. He wrote this letter.
He's like, I've been waiting 30 years to do this prank. I wonder when he decided to tape up the letter. Did he do it in 1955? I mean, obviously, he must have done it pretty quickly after.
I think he would have had to, because otherwise he would have had to save all those pieces.
Yeah, and why would you save all the trash? You would just throw it away.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing he decided right after he sent Marty to the future, he put it right back. So he had to change a heart pretty quickly then.
Yeah, what do you think made him change his mind?
I don't know. I think part of it is, he says to Marty, it's like, it's gonna be a long 30 years before I get to talk to you again about the next couple of days, is what he says to him. So I think maybe it's like right then he's like maybe already kind of missing Marty and like wishes he had somebody he could talk to about time travel and how awesome that was that they just sent somebody through time, and decided to just kind of piece the letter together right then. And then kept it for 30 years.
I always wondered if, he thought that Doc Brown had sent him back to give him a message.
Mm.
But why would Marty not have said that, You sent me back in time. I need to tell you this.
Right.
You told me to.
You told me to tell you this. And it's such a dilemma for Marty, because he feels bad because Doc talks about, in the 50s, Doc talks about like how excited he is. He's like, I'm going to be able to travel through time. And Marty's like, no, you're not. And so he wants to help him. And thankfully Doc looks at the letter and he's able to. So Marty wakes up in the same house, but everything's different.
He wakes up in the exact same sleeping position he was
when Doc calls him.
To
meet him.
Yeah.
And he's a teenager. I'm sure that's just how he sleeps.
Mm-hmm.
But he wakes up thinking it was a nightmare, which I love his double take when he walks past the kitchen or wherever they're
the living room.
Yeah, this brother and sister eating. He like walks back and then he's like throws himself back into the room. I always wear a suit to the office.
Biff's out there waxing the
car.
Comes out, hi, Marty.
Yeah. Hey, Marty.
Oh, that's the thing that he's bringing in the book.
Oh, yeah, I did want to talk about that, yeah.
Why is it his first novel? He's so successful.
I don't know, and that's something actually... Because I remember, like, while we were watching it tonight, I was thinking about... It was probably around the scene where George doesn't want Marty to read his stories. I probably was just immediately thinking about him as the novelist in the future. I assumed that this wasn't his first book; it was his new book. Because why? Like, I wonder what they're doing. Because you would think that the confidence he got from all that led him to be able to start showing people his writing, and he would be a published author.
What else would he have chosen to do?
I don't know. That's that's why I feel like him saying your first novel really kind of weakens it almost.
Yeah,
it's because he decided to kind of do like some sort of backup plan, and now has decided to write a book or something. So in my brain, that's not his first book. Biff was mistaken. It's the first copy of his new book. How about that? No, but I think it was somebody clearly says it's your first novel. And it was called A Match Made in Space or something like that. But I really do think that, he in my brain, he's a successful novelist, and that's how he has made his money and whatnot. But I don't know. There's not too much else I have really to say about Back to the Future. I love the scene, which we didn't talk really about, but the whole, the probably one of the most famous scenes in the movie, which is where Biff is chasing him around the square, and he steals the skateboard from the kid, and then and then Biff ends up in them, hitting the truck of manure. That's I love that scene because Marty knows like these tricks that are probably old to him, like the whole like what's that over there? But in the 50s they actually worked. And I like that he stands up to Biff. I like that Marty isn't afraid of his like little size.
He trips him.
He trips him right at first. And then punches him right in the face. He goes, what's that over there? And then punches him in the face. And then he understands that Biff is quite a bit bigger than him, though, so he makes a run for it. But he's able to successfully get away from him. And he looks like such a cool guy doing it. Like I completely understand why Lorraine thinks that he's like awesome.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for George in that scene because George kind of has to just like slink away because...
And he was trying to get the date.
Yeah, he was trying to get the date at the time, and he has to kind of slink away because she's just not even looking at him. She's paying all that attention to Calvin Klein.
I'm your density.
I mean, destiny. And he almost gets her there. If you'll pay attention, like, oh yeah, because once he says that, he's like, I mean, destiny. She kind of has like this little moment, but then Biff walks in and ruins it.
Yeah, I think that's about all I have to say, too.
Well, I pretty much know your rating already, but
You do?
Well, I have a guess at what you would rate it.
What do you rate it?
What do I rate it?
Yeah.
A+.
A+.
I'm assuming yours is 4.5.
I'm going to go actually with 4. 4 out of 5.
4 out of 5?
4 out of 5.
Why so low?
It's not low.
But it's lower than I expected. Why do you not give it that half star?
Well, I mean, it's an amazing movie. 4 out of 5 stars is really good for me.
Sure.
That's why, I mean, it doesn't seem like it because most of the
Spider-Man
movies...
2 got 4.5.
Well, I do like Spider-Man 2 better than Back to the Future.
And that just seems blasphemous to me, but I think it's because, like you said, I've watched it.
You've watched it.
I grew up on this movie. Yeah. I've seen it so many times.
I've seen it, like I said, about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
It's an amazing movie. 4 out of 5 stars to me fits about where I'd want to put it.
Cool.
I knew you weren't going to be happy when I said that.
Well, that's all right. This will just be the last episode ever. I clearly can't do a podcast with somebody who only gives Back to the Future 4 out of 5 stars. There's an opening if anybody would like to apply for co-host of superheroes movies and superhero movies. Well, we'd love to know what you think of Back to the Future. Please comment at cinemaheroes.com, or you can go to our Facebook, facebook.com/SM and SM podcast. Or you can always tweet us at cinemaheroes on Twitter. Obviously, I really enjoy the movie. John loves the movie as well.
I do.
Not as much as he should, but he likes it. No, I'm just giving him a hard time. But no, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the movie, and also we'd love to hear your feedback on the show. And if you have any movies in mind that you would like us to talk about, I'm sure we have a long list of movies that we intend to talk about, but just curious about what you guys would like to hear. And as always, if you have any Amazon purchases, head to cinemaheroes.com, click the Amazon banner. Doesn't cost you anything extra, but we get a tiny percentage of the money you spend, and that's always appreciated and helpful for our podcasting costs. I think that about wraps it up. So I'm Justin Speck.
I'm John Palzel.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading.